I never thought a bunch of herbs would change my life, but here I am, Jade Powell, tea artisan extraordinaire, about to spill the leaves on how I met the love of my life. It was a typical Oakland spring day at the community garden, all sunshine and earthy scents. I was fussing over my chamomile patch when this stunning blonde with piercing gray eyes walked up, looking lost as hell. "Excuse me," she said, her voice as smooth as my favorite oolong. "I'm supposed to be meeting someone about herb growing, but I'm clearly out of my element here." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, you're in luck. I'm the resident herb witch around these parts. I'm Jade. Daisy Ramirez," she replied, offering a hand that I shook maybe a second too long. "I'm a journalist working on a piece about sustainable living. Mind if I pick your brain?" And just like that, we were off. I showed her around the garden, pointing out different herbs and their uses. Daisy was like a sponge, soaking up every bit of information with genuine curiosity. It wasn't just about the article for her. I could see a spark of real interest in those mesmerizing eyes. "So, what got you into all this?" Daisy asked as we sat on a bench, surrounded by the garden's greenery. I took a deep breath, inhaling the mix of rosemary and lavender. "It started with tea, actually. I'm a tea artisan by trade. The more I learned about tea, the more I wanted to understand the plants that go into it. One thing led to another, and here I am, up to my elbows in dirt most days." Daisy's eyes lit up. "Tea? Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. I'm a bit of a coffee addict myself, but I've always been curious about tea culture." I couldn't resist. "How about I give you a proper introduction? I'm hosting a tea ceremony at my studio next week. You should come." She hesitated for a moment, and I felt my heart skip a beat. But then she smiled, and I swear the whole garden got a little brighter. "I'd love to. It's a date." The word date hung in the air between us, neither of us quite sure how to interpret it. But I knew one thing for certain: I wanted to see more of Daisy Ramirez. The next week flew by in a flurry of anticipation. I found myself putting extra care into preparing for the ceremony, selecting my finest oolong and polishing my best tea set. When Daisy arrived at my studio, she took my breath away. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a flowy green dress that matched my eyes perfectly. As we sat down for the ceremony, I could feel a connection forming between us. The ritual of preparing and serving the tea created an intimate atmosphere, and our conversation flowed as smoothly as the steaming liquid into our cups. "This is incredible," Daisy murmured, closing her eyes as she savored the tea. I had no idea it could be such a sensual experience. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Tea is about more than just flavor. It's about connection, to the earth, to tradition, and to each other. Our eyes met over the rims of our cups, and I felt a spark of electricity between us. As the evening wore on, our conversation deepened. We talked about our passions, our dreams, and our views on life. I found myself drawn to Daisy's intelligence and her genuine desire to make a difference in the world through her journalism. As the ceremony came to an end, neither of us seemed eager to part ways. We stood at the door, lingering in each other's company. "Thank you for this," Daisy said softly. "It was enlightening." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. "The pleasure was all mine. Same time next week?" She nodded, and before I knew what was happening, she leaned in and planted a soft kiss on my cheek. "It's a date," she whispered, echoing our earlier conversation. As I watched her walk away, I knew that something special had begun to steep between us. Little did I know that our budding relationship would soon be tested by distance, deception, and a whole lot of drama. But for now, I was content to bask in the afterglow of our first real connection, already looking forward to our next encounter. The weeks that followed our first tea ceremony were like a dream. Daisy and I fell into a rhythm as natural as the changing seasons. Every Saturday, we'd meet at the community garden, tending to our herbs and vegetables side by side. Our fingers would brush as we pulled weeds, and each accidental touch sent shivers down my spine. But it was our weekly tea sessions that truly became the highlight of my life. Daisy would arrive at my studio, her blonde hair catching the late afternoon sun, and my heart would do a little dance. We'd sit cross-legged on cushions, the steam from our cups curling between us like a shared secret. "You know," Daisy said one evening, her gray eyes twinkling, "I never thought I'd become such a tea convert." "You've ruined coffee for me, Jade." I laughed, pouring her another cup of my special blend. "Just wait until you try matcha. It'll blow your mind." As the weeks passed, Our conversations deepened. We shared stories of our childhoods, our hopes, our fears. I found myself opening up to Daisy in ways I never had with anyone before. There was something about her presence that made me feel safe, understood. One balmy evening, I decided to change things up. "How do you feel about heights?" I asked as Daisy arrived for our usual session. She raised an eyebrow. "Depends. Are you planning to push me off something?" "Not unless you steal the last cookie," I teased. "I thought we could have our ceremony on the rooftop garden tonight. The sunset's supposed to be spectacular." Daisy's face lit up. "Lead the way, Tea Master." We climbed the stairs to the rooftop, where I'd set up a cozy nook surrounded by potted herbs and fairy lights. Daisy's intake of breath told me I'd made the right choice. The sky was a canvas of pinks and oranges, the Oakland skyline silhouetted against the fading light. As we settled into our usual positions, I could feel a charge in the air, different from our previous sessions. Maybe it was the intimacy of the setting, or the way the fading sunlight caught the gold in Daisy's hair, but I found myself struggling to focus on the ceremony. We sipped our tea in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the twilight, Daisy looked ethereal, her profile outlined in the soft glow of the fairy lights. "Jade," she said softly, turning to face me, "I need to tell you something." My heart leaped into my throat. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I'm working on an article about traditional tea ceremonies, and I'd like to feature you in it. Your expertise, your passion, it's exactly what I've been looking for." I blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't what I'd been expecting or hoping for, but I couldn't deny the flutter of excitement at the idea. "Daisy, wow, I'd be honored." She beamed at me, and in that moment, I couldn't hold back any longer. I leaned in, my hand cupping her cheek, and kissed her. For a heart-stopping second, she froze, and I feared I'd misread everything. But then she melted into the kiss, her lips soft and tasting faintly of oolong. When we finally pulled apart, both a little breathless, Daisy let out a shaky laugh. "Well, that's definitely going in the article." "Oh, shut up," I murmured, pulling her in for another kiss. From that night on, our relationship blossomed like a perfectly steeped tea. Daisy spent more and more time at my place, and soon, we were talking about moving in together. The day she brought over her prized orchid collection to join my jungle of plants felt more significant than any "I love you." We fell into a routine of domestic bliss. Mornings were a dance of tangled limbs and stolen kisses as we got ready for our days. Evenings were spent cooking together, experimenting with tea-infused recipes, and cuddling on the couch while Daisy worked on her articles and I sketched designs for new tea blends. One night, after a particularly successful tea workshop I'd hosted, we tumbled into bed, giddy with excitement and just a little buzzed on my special chamomile brew. What followed was a night of passion that left us both breathless and glowing. As we lay there afterward, Daisy tracing patterns on my skin, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. But life, as it often does, had other plans for us. Just as we were settling into our happily ever after, Daisy received a call that would change everything. Her mother had suffered a stroke and needed round-the-clock care. Daisy, being the only child, had to go. "I have to leave for a while," she told me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mom needs me. I don't know how long it'll be." My heart sank, but I put on a brave face. "Hey, we'll make it work. There's this amazing new invention called the internet, you know." She managed a watery chuckle. "What would I do without you?" As I helped her pack, my mind was already whirring with ideas for virtual tea ceremonies and long-distance date nights. We'd make this work, I told myself. After all, our love was as strong and complex as my best-aged pu-erh. A little distance couldn't change that. Or so I thought. Little did I know that this separation would test our relationship in ways I couldn't have imagined, and that the bitter brew of deceit was already steeping, ready to potentially tear us apart. The day Daisy left felt like someone had ripped out a piece of my heart. I stood in our now half-empty apartment, surrounded by the plants we'd lovingly tended together, feeling more alone than I had in years. But I was determined to make this work. After all, love conquers all, right? The first few weeks of our long-distance relationship were a whirlwind of adaptation. We scheduled daily video calls, timed perfectly so we could share a virtual cup of tea together. I'd send her care packages filled with my latest blends, and she'd regale me with stories of her mother's slow but steady recovery. "You should see her, Jade. Daisy said one evening, her face pixelated but still beautiful on my laptop screen. She's got more fight in her than I ever imagined. I smiled, raising my teacup in a toast. Must run in the family. As the weeks turned into months, we fell into a new routine. Every Sunday, we'd have our virtual tea ceremony. I'd guide Daisy through the process, and for a little while it felt like we were back in my studio, lost in our own little world. But it wasn't the same. I missed the warmth of her hand in mine, the scent of her hair, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. The distance was taking its toll, and I could feel a strain creeping into our conversations. It was during one of these Sunday ceremonies that Daisy dropped a bombshell. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice hesitant. What if I moved back here permanently? To take care of Mom?" The words hit me like a splash of scalding tea. "Permanently?" I echoed, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "But what about us? Your job in Oakland?" Daisy sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know it's a lot to ask, Jade, but Mom needs me, and I've been offered a position at the local paper. It's a good opportunity." I felt like I was drowning, grasping for anything to keep me afloat. "What if I moved there?" I blurted out. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Daisy spoke, her voice soft. "Jade, you can't. Your tea studio, your whole life is in Oakland. I can't ask you to give that up." We ended the call shortly after, both of us emotionally drained. As I sat there, staring at the blank screen, I made a decision. I wouldn't lose Daisy. I'd find a way to make this work, even if it meant completely uprooting my life. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into research. I looked into tea shops in Daisy's new city, explored the possibility of franchising my studio, even considered switching to an entirely online business model. It was exhausting, but the thought of being with Daisy again kept me going. Then came the night that changed everything. I was up late, going over some financial projections, when my phone pinged with a text from Daisy. "Can you talk? It's urgent." Heart racing, I called her immediately. When she answered, I could tell she'd been crying. "Daisy, what's wrong? Is it your mom?" No, she's fine," Daisy sniffled. Gosh, Jade, I've done something stupid." She went on to explain that she'd been approached by an investment company online. They'd promised incredible returns, and in a moment of weakness, thinking about our future together, she'd invested a significant chunk of her savings. "And now it's all gone," she sobbed. "I can't even access the account anymore. I think I've been scammed." I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Concern for Daisy, anger at the scammers, and if I'm being honest, a tiny bit of frustration that she'd made such a big financial decision without talking to me first. But now wasn't the time for that. Hey, I soothed. "It's going to be okay. We'll figure this out together." We spent the next few hours going over everything. The initial contact, the promises made, the website that had now disappeared. As the sun began to rise, we had a plan of action, including contacting the police and her bank. "Thank you," Daisy whispered, as we were about to hang up. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I managed a small smile. That's what partners are for, right? But as I finally crawled into bed, exhausted and emotionally drained, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The distance, the stress of her mother's condition, and now this financial blow. It was all taking its toll. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and emails as we tried to untangle the mess of the scam. Daisy was distant, consumed by guilt and worry. Our daily calls became shorter, our conversations more stilted. I tried to be supportive, but I could feel her pulling away. It all came to a head during what should have been our weekly virtual tea ceremony. Daisy was distracted, barely participating in the ritual that had become so important to us. "Daisy," I finally said, setting down my cup, "talk to me. What's really going on?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. I feel so stupid, Jade, and ashamed. I should have known better." "We all make mistakes," I tried to reassure her. "Do we?" she snapped, surprising me with her vehemence. "Because I seem to be making all of them lately. Moving away, falling for this scam. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." "For what?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Daisy sighed, finally looking at me. "For any of it. Long-distance relationships, managing my own finances, being the person you deserve." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Daisy, no, that's not true. We can work through this." But I could see in her eyes that she was already pulling away. The call ended shortly after, with promises to talk again soon that felt hollow even as we made them. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of our virtual tea ceremony, I realized that the future I'd been so carefully planning might be slipping through my fingers like loose tea leaves. The bitter taste of uncertainty filled my mouth, and for the first time, I wondered if love really could conquer all. The weeks following Daisy's confession about the scam were like steeping a particularly bitter tea. Each day seemed to draw out more unpleasant flavors. Our daily calls dwindled to every other day, then to a couple times a week. When we did talk, there was a tension that hadn't existed before, a wall of unspoken words and fears between us. I tried to keep our connection alive the best way I knew how, through tea. I started hosting virtual tea ceremonies, not just for Daisy, but for a small group of tea enthusiasts I'd connected with online. It was a way to stay busy, to feel like I was doing something productive while my personal life felt like it was unraveling. And now we'll let the leaves steep for exactly 3 minutes, I instructed, watching the faces on my screen nod along. My eyes kept darting to Daisy's window, hoping to see that spark of interest that had first drawn us together. But her gaze was distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. After the session, when the others had logged off, I tried to engage her. "So, what did you think of the new oolong blend?" Daisy shrugged, the movement jerky through the pixelated video. "It was fine, I guess. Look, Jade, I'm really tired. Can we talk tomorrow?" I swallowed my disappointment. Sure, of course, get some rest. But tomorrow came and went without a call, then another day, and another. My messages went unanswered, and a gnawing worry began to eat at me. Was Daisy okay? Had something happened to her mother? Or was she purposely avoiding me? On the 5th day of silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I called her number, my heart pounding with each ring. When she finally answered, her voice was groggy and irritated. "Jade? Do you know what time it is?" I glanced at the clock, wincing as I realized it was past midnight her time. "I'm sorry, I was worried. I haven't heard from you in days." There was a long pause, and when Daisy spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "I've been busy. Mom had a setback, and work's been crazy." "You could have sent a text," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Another pause. "You're right. I'm sorry. I needed some space to think." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Think about what?" "About us, Jade. About whether this is really working." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" Daisy sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. "I'm saying that this long-distance thing is harder than I thought. And with everything that's happened, I'm not sure I'm in the right headspace for a relationship right now." I felt like I was drowning, grasping for anything to keep us afloat. "We can work through this, Daisy. I can visit more often, or maybe I could move." "No," she cut me off firmly. "I can't ask you to do that. Your life is in Oakland." "My life is with you," I insisted. "Is it?" Daisy's voice was soft, almost sad. "Or are we just clinging to something that's already slipping away?" I didn't have an answer for that. We ended the call soon after, with vague promises to talk again soon. But as I sat in the darkness of my apartment, surrounded by the plants we'd tended together and the tea sets we'd used, I felt a crushing loneliness settle over me. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of my daily routine, tending to the plants, preparing tea blends for online orders, hosting virtual ceremonies, but my heart wasn't in it. Every buzz of my phone sent my heart racing, hoping it was Daisy, only to be disappointed. It was during one of these moments of false hope that I noticed something odd. A notification from my bank app, alerting me to a large withdrawal I didn't remember making. Frowning, I opened the app and felt my blood run cold. Someone had been making small, regular withdrawals from my account over the past few weeks, culminating in this larger sum. As I scrolled through the transactions, a sickening realization dawned on me. The dates of the withdrawals coincided perfectly with the times I'd been hosting my virtual tea ceremonies. My mind raced. Had someone hacked into my account through the video calls? Was this connected to the scam that had targeted Daisy? And if it was, did that mean others in our tea community were at risk too? With shaking hands, I dialed Daisy's number. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice calm. "Daisy, it's me. I think I might have been scammed too. Call me back as soon as you can, please." As I ended the call, a new determination filled me. If Daisy and I were both victims of the same scam, then this wasn't just about our relationship anymore. This was about protecting our community, about seeking justice. I spent the next few hours combing through my bank statements, making lists of suspicious activities, and researching similar scams online. By the time dawn broke, I had a plan. I was going to get to the bottom of this, with or without Daisy's help. But as I finally crawled into bed, exhausted but resolute, I couldn't shake the feeling that this investigation might be the key to more than just catching some online fraudsters. Maybe, just maybe, it could be the thing that brought Daisy and me back together. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself and to Daisy. I would solve this mystery, I would protect our tea community, and I would fight for our love. Because some things, like a perfectly steeped cup of tea, were worth the wait and the effort. And Daisy? She was worth everything. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. My first order of business was to call the bank and report the suspicious activity. The customer service rep was sympathetic but not particularly helpful. "We'll investigate, Miss Powell, but these things can take time." Time was something I didn't have. If this scam was as widespread as I suspected, every day meant more victims, more lost savings. I needed to take matters into my own hands. I brewed myself a strong cup of pu-erh, its earthy aroma grounding me as I formulated a plan. First things first, I needed to warn the tea community. I sent out an email to everyone who had attended my virtual ceremonies, careful not to cause panic but urging them to check their accounts. Within hours, responses started flooding in. 3 others had noticed similar withdrawals. My heart sank. This was bigger than I'd feared. As I was compiling the information, my phone buzzed. Daisy's name flashed on the screen, and my heart leapt into my throat. "Jade? I got your message. Are you okay?" Her voice, tinged with concern, brought a lump to my throat. "I'm fine, just shaken. Daisy, I think the scam that hit you has spread to our tea community." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh gosh, how bad is it?" I filled her in on what I'd discovered. As I talked, I felt a glimmer of our old connection. The easy back and forth we'd always had when tackling a problem. "We need to go to the police," Daisy said firmly. I tried. I sighed. "They said without more concrete evidence, there's not much they can do. It's not a big enough case for them to prioritize." Daisy was quiet for a moment. What if we could make it a bigger case? I'm a journalist, Jade. I could investigate this, turn it into a story. Maybe that would get the attention of the authorities." A spark of hope ignited in my chest. "You'd do that?" "Of course," she said softly. "This affects both of us and our community. I want to help." For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same team again. We spent the next few hours strategizing, falling back into our old rhythm of bouncing ideas off each other. It felt good. It felt right. Over the next few days, Daisy and I dove headfirst into our investigation. She used her journalistic contacts to dig into similar scams in other cities, while I reached out to more members of the tea community, piecing together a timeline of the fraud. As we worked, I couldn't help but notice a shift in our interactions. The awkwardness that had plagued our recent conversations was fading, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. We were talking more, laughing more. It felt like old times. One evening, as we were video chatting and going over our findings, Daisy suddenly went quiet. "What is it?" I asked, noticing the furrow in her brow. "I think I've found a connection," she said slowly. "Jade, do you remember that new tea supplier you started using a few months ago? The one with the really good deals on rare blends?" I nodded, a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Well, I've been tracing the money trail from some of the scammed accounts, and, Jade, I think that supplier might be involved." The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd introduced that supplier to our community, raved about their teas. If they were behind this. "It's not your fault," Daisy said quickly, reading the horror on my face. "You couldn't have known." But the guilt was already settling in my chest, heavy as wet tea leaves. I should have been more careful. I should have. "Hey," Daisy cut me off gently. "We're going to fix this, okay? Together." Her words, so reminiscent of the support we used to give each other, brought tears to my eyes. "I've missed you," I blurted out before I could stop myself. Daisy's expression softened. "I've missed you too, Jade. More than you know. We held each other's gaze through the screen, a moment of connection that felt more real than anything had in months. But before either of us could say more, Daisy's attention was drawn away by something off-screen. "Shoot, Mom's calling, I've got to go." She hesitated, then added, "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? We'll figure this out." As the call ended, I sat back, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. The discovery about the tea supplier was troubling, but the rekindling of my connection with Daisy, that felt like the first sip of a perfect brew after a long dry spell. The next day, however, brought a harsh reality check. Daisy's call didn't come, nor did it come the day after. My messages went unanswered, and that familiar knot of worry began to form in my stomach again. On the third day of silence, I was about to call her when my phone pinged with a text. It was from an unknown number, but the content made my blood run cold. "We know what you're doing. Back off, or your girlfriend's mother might have another setback." My hands shook as I tried to call Daisy, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic rising in my throat, I did the only thing I could think of. I booked the next flight to Daisy's city. As the plane took off, I stared out the window at the receding Oakland skyline. I had no idea what I was flying into, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let anyone hurt Daisy or her mother. Whatever was going on, whatever dangers we were facing, we would face them together. The tea leaves of fate were swirling, and I was determined to read them, no matter how bitter the brew might be. The flight felt interminable, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. By the time I landed, I was a jittery mess, running on adrenaline and airport coffee that tasted like it had been steeped in motor oil. I hailed a cab, giving the driver Daisy's address with a voice that barely sounded like my own. As we pulled up to her mother's house, I saw no signs of disturbance. The garden was neat, the curtains drawn. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, suddenly unsure. What if I was overreacting? What if Daisy was fine and I was about to look like a stalker ex-girlfriend? Before I could second-guess myself further, the front door flew open. Daisy stood there, her blonde hair a mess, her gray eyes wide with surprise. "Jade? What are you doing here?" The relief at seeing her safe nearly knocked me off my feet. I stumbled forward, words tumbling out. "I got a threatening text. I couldn't reach you," I thought. Understanding dawned on her face. She pulled me into a fierce hug, and I breathed in her familiar scent, feeling the tension drain from my body. "I'm so sorry," she murmured into my hair. "My phone got hacked. I've been trying to sort it out. I had no idea you were trying to reach me." We moved inside, where Daisy's mother greeted me with a warm smile from her armchair. She looked frail but alert, her eyes sharp as she watched us. Over cups of chamomile tea, which felt blasphemous given the circumstances, but I needed something to steady my nerves, Daisy and I compared notes. The threat, the hacking, the sudden radio silence, it all pointed to one thing: we were getting too close to the truth. "We need help," I said, setting down my cup. "Professional help." Daisy nodded, her face set with determination. "I think I know someone who can help. Remember Sarah Gianna, the detective I interviewed last year for that cybercrime piece?" A plan began to form. With Detective Gianna's expertise and our combined knowledge of the tea community and the scam, we might have a chance at cracking this case wide open. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Detective Gianna, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, dove into our investigation with gusto. She set up surveillance on the suspicious tea supplier, while Daisy and I combed through financial records and community forums, looking for more victims and any patterns we might have missed. Working side by side with Daisy again felt right, like finding the perfect balance in a complex blend. We fell into our old rhythms, finishing each other's sentences, sharing knowing looks. More than once, I caught myself staring at her, marveling at the determined set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes as she chased down a lead. One evening, as we pored over documents spread across her mother's dining room table, our hands brushed reaching for the same paper. The touch sent a jolt through me, and I looked up to find Daisy's eyes locked on mine. For a moment, the investigation faded away, and all I could think about was how much I'd missed her. "Jade," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, for everything, for pushing you away, for—" I silenced her with a kiss. It was impulsive, probably ill-timed given the circumstances, but in that moment, it felt as necessary as breathing. Daisy froze for a split second, then melted into the kiss, her hands coming up to cup my face. When we finally pulled apart, both a little breathless, Daisy rested her forehead against mine. "I've missed you so much," she murmured. "I've missed you too," I replied, my heart soaring. "But we've got work to do, yeah?" She nodded, a determined glint returning to her eye. "Let's catch these bastards." With renewed energy, we threw ourselves back into the investigation. Detective Gianna's surveillance paid off. She managed to get photos of the tea supplier meeting with known members of a cybercrime ring. It was the break we needed. Armed with this evidence, we set up a sting operation. I would host another virtual tea ceremony, this time with carefully selected participants, all members of law enforcement posing as tea enthusiasts. The plan was to lure the scammers into trying to hack the event, giving the cybercrime unit the chance to trace their activities in real time. The night of the operation, I was a bundle of nerves. Daisy squeezed my hand reassuringly as I set up my laptop, the familiar ritual of preparing the tea doing little to calm my racing heart. "You've got this," she whispered, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek before moving out of frame. The ceremony began, and I fell into my usual patter describing the tea, its origins, the proper steeping technique. All the while, my eyes darted between the participants' windows, wondering which one might be our scammer. Halfway through the ceremony, Detective Gianna's voice crackled through the earpiece I was wearing. "We've got activity. Keep going, Jade. You're doing great." I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to remain steady as I poured the next round of tea. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. And then, "We've got them." Detective Gianna's triumphant voice filled my ear. "Trace complete. Units moving in now." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I nearly dropped the teapot. As I wrapped up the ceremony with shaky hands, Daisy burst into the room, her face alight with excitement. "They did it, Jade. They caught them." In the euphoria of the moment, I pulled her into a kiss, not caring that I was still on camera. The whoops and cheers from the participants barely registered as I lost myself in Daisy's embrace. Later that night, as we sat on her mother's porch, sipping celebratory cups of my finest oolong, the full weight of what we'd accomplished began to sink in. "We did it," I marveled, still hardly able to believe it. Daisy nodded, her head resting on my shoulder. "We make a pretty good team." As we sat there, watching the stars come out, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The case was solved, the scammers would face justice, and most importantly, Daisy was back in my arms. But as I turned to kiss her, a nagging thought tugged at the back of my mind. What now? Would Daisy return to Oakland with me? Or was I ready to leave my life behind and start anew here? The future was as uncertain as ever, but for now, I was content to savor this moment, this perfect blend of triumph and love. The days following the bust were a whirlwind of police statements, press conferences, and tearful thank yous from members of the tea community who'd fallen victim to the scam. Daisy and I were hailed as heroes, our names splashed across local newspapers and tea forums alike. It was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. But as the dust began to settle, reality started to creep back in. I'd been away from my studio for weeks, my plants probably withering, orders piling up. And Daisy. Well, Daisy was still here by her mother's side. We were curled up on her mother's porch swing one evening, sharing a pot of lavender white tea, when I finally broached the subject. "So," I began, my heart hammering, "what happens now?" Daisy was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on my arm. "I've been thinking about that a lot," she admitted. "Mom's doing better, but she still needs care. And my job at the local paper." I felt my heart sink. "You're staying, aren't you?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I think I have to, at least for now. But Jade," she turned to face me, her gray eyes intense, "I don't want to lose you again. Not after everything we've been through." I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. What if I moved here? Daisy's eyes widened. "Jade, no. Your studio, your whole life is in Oakland. I can't ask you to give that up." "You're not asking," I said firmly. "I'm offering. Daisy, these past few weeks have shown me something important. My life isn't in Oakland. It's wherever you are." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she pulled me into a kiss that tasted of lavender and promise. When we finally broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, feeling more certain than I had about anything in a long time. "Besides," I added with a grin, "I think this town could use a proper tea house, don't you?" And just like that, a new plan began to take shape. I'd go back to Oakland to wrap things up at my studio, and then return here to start fresh. We'd open a tea house together, combining my expertise in tea with Daisy's business savvy and journalistic connections. The next few weeks were a frenzy of activity. I flew back to Oakland, my heart heavy as I packed up my studio. Each familiar tea set wrapped in bubble wrap felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. But as I looked around at the bare walls, I realized that the soul of this place, the passion for tea, the desire to create connections, wasn't tied to this physical space. It was coming with me, to my new life with Daisy. My return flight was delayed, and by the time I finally made it back, it was well past midnight. Daisy was waiting for me at the airport, a sight for sore eyes after weeks apart. "Welcome home," she whispered, as she pulled me into a hug. Home. The words settled in my chest, warm and comforting as a perfectly steeped cup of chai. The next morning, fueled by jet lag and excitement, we hit the ground running. Daisy had already scouted out a few potential locations for our tea house, and we spent the day touring spaces, our minds whirling with possibilities. "What about here?" Daisy asked, gesturing to a cozy corner in an old brick building downtown. "We could put the main seating area here and maybe a little shop for loose-leaf teas and accessories over there." I closed my eyes, imagining the space filled with the aroma of brewing tea, the soft clink of cups, the murmur of conversation. "It's perfect," I breathed. As we worked on bringing our vision to life, I was struck by how seamlessly Daisy and I fell into step with each other. We complemented each other perfectly, her practicality balancing my flights of fancy, my expertise in tea grounding her ambitious business plans. One evening, as we sat surrounded by paint swatches and menu drafts, Daisy's mother called us to dinner. As we gathered around the table, I was struck by a sudden wave of emotion. This was my family now. This was home. "I've been thinking," Daisy's mother said as we dug into a delicious pot roast, "maybe it's time I moved into assisted living." Daisy nearly choked on her mouthful. "Mom, no, we're managing just fine." Her mother reached out, patting Daisy's hand. "Sweetheart, you've put your life on hold for me long enough. I've seen how happy you are with Jade, how excited you both are about this new venture. I don't want to hold you back." Tears welled up in Daisy's eyes. "You're not holding me back, Mom. You never have." "I know, dear. But I think this would be good for all of us. I'll be close by with round-the-clock care if I need it. And you two can start your new life together properly." I watched the exchange, my heart swelling with love for these strong, incredible women who had welcomed me into their lives. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. We finalized the lease on our tea house space, began renovations, and helped Daisy's mother settle into her new apartment at a nearby assisted living facility. It was exhausting, but exhilarating. Finally, the night before our grand opening arrived, Daisy and I stood in the middle of our newly furnished tea house, taking it all in. The warm lighting glinted off carefully arranged tea sets, the air fragrant with the scent of our custom blends. "We did it," Daisy breathed, squeezing my hand. I turned to her, overcome with emotion. "Daisy, I have something for you." Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a delicate silver ring adorned with a tiny teapot charm. "Jade!" Daisy gasped, her eyes wide. I dropped to one knee, my heart pounding. "Daisy Ramirez, will you marry me? Will you blend your life with mine for better or worse, in sickness and in health, in bitter teas and sweet?" For a heart-stopping moment, Daisy just stared at me, tears welling in her eyes. Then, with a choked laugh, she pulled me to my feet and into a passionate kiss. "Yes," she whispered against my lips. 1,000 times yes. As we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms in the heart of our new tea house, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This was where I belonged. This was my perfect brew, a blend of love, passion, and new beginnings, steeped in the warmth of home. The morning of our tea house grand opening dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself was blessing our new venture. I woke up early, my body thrumming with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Beside me, Daisy still slept peacefully, her blonde hair splayed across the pillow, the silver ring glinting on her finger. I slipped out of bed quietly, padding to the kitchen to brew us a special blend I'd created just for today, a mix of energizing black tea, calming chamomile, and a hint of lucky jasmine. As the kettle whistled, Daisy emerged from the bedroom, yawning and stretching. "Morning, fiancé," she murmured, wrapping her arms around me from behind and pressing a kiss to my neck. The word sent a thrill through me. Fiancé. Soon-to-be wife. It still felt surreal in the best possible way. We sipped our tea in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts of the day ahead. Finally, Daisy spoke. "Ready to change some lives with tea?" I grinned, clinking my cup against hers. "Let's do this." The hours leading up to the opening flew by in a flurry of last-minute preparations. We arranged and rearranged tea sets, fussed over the placement of our loose-leaf displays, and triple-checked our stock of homemade scones and tea sandwiches. As the clock struck 10, Daisy squeezed my hand. "Showtime," she whispered, and flipped the sign on the door to "Open." For a heart-stopping moment, the street outside remained empty. Then, like a dam breaking, people began to stream in. Friends from the tea community, local business owners, curious passers-by, all eager to see what steep love our chosen name for the tea house had to offer. The day passed in a whirlwind of steeping, serving, and sharing stories. I found myself in my element, guiding customers through our menu of carefully curated blends, each with its own unique story. Daisy flitted between tables, her journalistic skills put to good use as she chatted with patrons, gathering feedback and making everyone feel welcome. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed a familiar face enter the shop. Detective Sarah Gianna, looking decidedly off-duty in jeans and a casual blazer, made her way to the counter. "Quite a place you've got here," she said with a smile. "Far cry from busting cybercriminals, huh?" I laughed, already reaching for our special Sleuth's blend, a robust black tea with notes of bergamot and a hint of smoke. Well, you never know. We might overhear some nefarious tea-related plots. Sarah chuckled, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. "I'll keep my ears open. But seriously, congratulations. You two have created something special here." As the detective found a seat, I caught Daisy's eye across the room. She was deep in conversation with an elderly couple, but she paused to flash me a radiant smile. My heart swelled with love and pride. The day continued, a steady stream of customers keeping us busy until well past our planned closing time. As we finally ushered out the last lingering patrons, Daisy collapsed into a chair with a contented sigh. "We did it," she said, her eyes shining with exhaustion and joy. I nodded, too tired for words, and began the process of cleaning up. As we worked side by side, wiping down tables and washing teacups, a comfortable silence fell between us. It was broken only by the soft strains of music from the vintage radio we'd set up in the corner. Suddenly, Daisy straightened up, her eyes sparkling. "Dance with me," she said, holding out her hand. I raised an eyebrow, glancing pointedly at the half-cleaned shop around us, but Daisy just grinned, pulling me close. The mess can wait. This moment can't. And so we danced, swaying gently in the middle of our tea house, surrounded by the lingering aroma of 100 different brews. As we moved, I caught glimpses of our future. Cozy evenings spent experimenting with new blends, lazy Sunday mornings sharing tea and the newspaper, a lifetime of love and laughter, steeped in the warmth of our shared passion. "What are you thinking about?" Daisy murmured, her head resting on my shoulder. I smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm thinking that this, right here, right now, is the perfect blend." She lifted her head, her gray eyes meeting mine. "Better than your award-winning Earl Grey?" "Much better," I chuckled. "This blend is once in a lifetime." As we continued to sway, lost in our own world, I marveled at the journey that had brought us here. From that first meeting in the community garden to solving a cybercrime ring, from heartache and separation to this moment of pure, distilled happiness. It hadn't always been smooth sailing, but like the best teas, our love had only grown richer and more complex with time. The song on the radio faded out, replaced by the soft patter of rain against the windows. But we kept dancing, reluctant to break the spell of the moment. "I love you, Jade Powell," Daisy whispered, her lips brushing against my ear. "And I love you, Daisy Ramirez," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Soon to be Daisy Powell Ramirez." She pulled back slightly, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Or will you be Jade Ramirez Powell?" I pretended to consider it for a moment. "How about we blend our names, just like we blend our teas?" Daisy's laughter, warm and rich as a perfect cup of chai, filled the room. I think that sounds perfect. As we finally broke apart to finish cleaning, I couldn't help but feel that we had stumbled upon the secret to a perfect life. It wasn't about finding someone who completed you, but someone who complemented you, like the ideal pairing of tea and dessert. Daisy and I, we were two distinct flavors that, when combined, created something extraordinary. And as we locked up the tea house that night, hand in hand, I knew that our grand opening was just the beginning. We had a lifetime of blending ahead of us, teas, lives, and love, and I couldn't wait to savor every moment.